Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, a podcast all about growing your network and building your brand through traditional and digital networking techniques. I'm Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. I've been strengthening brands through PR for over 35 years, and now I'm celebrating the success of executives, influencers, business owners, and entrepreneurs from all around the world, all of whom have cultivated their brands and broadened their networks through traditional and digital networking methods. Each week, I interview one of these interesting and influential individuals and provide an opportunity for you, the PR Maven Nation, to gain insights from their strategies and stories. So stay tuned for this week's episode, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, episode number 208, presented by Marshall Communications, creator of the Marshall Plan 65-step Marshall Plan process. For those of you new to the show, I'm Nancy Marshall, your host, the PR Maven and CEO of Marshall Communications. And with me today is another PR professional who I have gotten to know through the world of podcasting. And I've actually been a guest on his podcast. I want to welcome Jody Fisher, who's Vice President of Public Relations at Austin Williams. Welcome to the PR Maven Podcast, Jody.
Nancy, thank you so much for having me on as a guest. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this.
Me too. And it's so funny because when I said I'm so used to saying the PR Maven podcast, I almost said that's your podcast, but I'm the PR Maven podcast and you're the PR podcast. So.
There is only one PR Maven, Nancy. You are it.
Well, yeah, I have a trademark on that, so I have to monitor the airwaves to make sure nobody else calls them that. So Jody Fisher is Vice President of Public Relations at Austin Williams, a Long Island-based marketing, advertising, and digital agency. Jody leads a division that represents clients across healthcare, higher education, financial services, nonprofit, and real estate. And in his 25-year career as a PR leader, I got you up on that a little bit, Jody. But we won't talk about
feels
that.
Like 50.
I started when I was 2. In his 25-year career as a PR leader, he has worked with New York-based clients that include the Intrepid Sea and Air and Space Museum, Silverstein Properties at the World Trade Center, Friends of the High Line. I love walking the High Line. The New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, which I also love, and many more. He is also the host of the PR Podcast, a weekly show that spotlights guests with expertise in public relations and the news business. And I was a guest on his podcast, and it was a big honor to be on there. He's also a former NYC radio reporter, as you will hear from his voice, and he brings his newsroom savvy to his clients to create actionable PR programs. So, Jody, welcome to the PR Maven Podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, me too. So tell us about your career in PR and how you got into it in the first place.
Oh boy. Well, PR wasn't what I set out to do. As you mentioned in my background, I was a New York City radio reporter. And back from when I was a Cub Scout touring a local radio station and looked into the studio and saw the news person sitting there with their microphone in a dark room, I said, that's what I want to do. And so I ended up, long story short, being a New York City radio reporter out there on the street with my microphone. And back then it was a bag phone and a tape recorder. And you're running around going to events, or you're talking to people on the street, or whatever you're doing as a reporter, sniffing out news, and sending those reports back in on the air. It was a terrific, terrific career. And, when I reached a point where I said, I don't think I want to make this my life's goal, even though it had been my life's goal. I got to WCBS radio very, very quickly in my career, it was one of the 2 all news radio stations in New York City. I said, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And I made a lateral move into PR, and I've been doing that since 1999.
Nice. Very nice. Well, I admire you because, I mean, that was a competitive marketplace you started in, and you got to the top of the market if you're at CBS
It
radio.
was, I whenever I talk with young people who are in journalism or reporting or whatever, I always urge them to not necessarily follow the conventional wisdom of you got to go to the middle of nowhere. And I'm specifically thinking about broadcast to get on the air, right?
Right.
I mean, I never left the New York market. I went to college at a local school, Fordham University up in the Bronx, but I chose it not because it was a good school, which it was, but because they would put me on the air at WFUV, the 50,000 watt FM radio station, on my first day. Well, maybe not my first day, but you get my picture. And for 4 years, I sat behind a microphone every single day at that radio station. And that gave me the training that I needed to then go out and get a job. I had a job the first day the day I graduated college. And I went to work alongside the best in the business. These are New York City radio anchors, writers, reporters, producers. And at 22 years old, they taught me exactly how it's supposed to get done. And I'm grateful for that training because that's what set me up to be both the college experience and that first job out of college experience, taught me the right habits. And so if you don't want to go to the middle of nowhere, I urge people, don't go to the middle of nowhere. Stay where your heart is and work like crazy and you can get there.
Yeah. Well, I also love that you were in the Cub Scouts and that the Cub Scouts had like this career. They took you on a tour of a radio station so that you could plant that in your mind.
I remember it to this day. I mean, it's so funny that the things that, make an impression on you.
Right. Yeah. Well, my father worked for Westinghouse Electric Corporation throughout his whole life. And he knew by my personality that PR was a good fit for me because he had worked with the PR people for Westinghouse. So when I was a senior in college, he arranged for me to spend a whole week job shadowing the PR staff in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I, like you, I saw what they were doing. And I'm like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And I'm very grateful because so many people spend their lives trying to figure out what they were meant to do. And I think because of my dad, I was able to see it and then set my sights on it. And that's what I've done my whole life, basically.
That's great. Great story. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Jody, you love talking about pitching the media. And I have always said that it's where the rubber hits the road because anybody can put out a press release. Anybody can write a press release, email it out in what I call spray and pray. But pitching the media is the most valuable aspect in my mind of a publicist or a PR agency. How can people think like a reporter when they're pitching media?
Well, thank you for asking me. That's a great question. It's in my DNA because of my background. It's what I did. Right. And so I never got rid of that, right? It's still here. And as recently as just 3 days ago, whenever that was, with a client telling me about a story, and they told me just the briefest of details, the first 2 sentences. And I said, oh, that's a great story. And literally wrote it up in 10 minutes and sent it to a local reporter who I knew would love it. And she got back to me in 5 minutes and she said, that's it. Yep, that's it. Yes, set it up. Let's go. And it's really that easy. I think, there's a couple things about thinking like a reporter. And the first thing you have to do before you even start writing anything is you've got to have a sensibility about what's newsworthy, right? And so I sometimes say that everything belongs somewhere, but not everything is newsworthy, right? All of your messages don't all belong in the newspaper, right? Some of them belong on your social media. Some of them belong on your blog. Some of them belong in your e-newsletter. And some of them, yes, belong in your newspaper or on the radio or on TV. And you have to figure out, based on the qualities that are inside each of those messages or each of those stories, what belongs where. And so it's all about finding a story. All news reporting is a story. You got to be a storyteller. And that's what thinking like a reporter is about, is being a storyteller. And then pulling out those nuggets that a particular reporter or a particular outlet will like, because it speaks to their audience. You're never only speaking to the reporter or the editor, you're speaking through them to their audience. So why does their audience come to them for information? And what type of information do they come to them for? Right? I mean, you mentioned the Wall Street Journal before. A Wall Street Journal pitch is going to read a whole lot different from, the local hometown paper pitch, right? And the one might not fit in the other, and probably won't. You got to think like a reporter. Look for the news story. That's the first thing that I do.
And also, what is newsworthy changes from day to day, because it all depends on what's happening in the world. So, if there's a slow news day, a softer story might hit and resonate. And the other thing that we do as publicists is identify national or international trends and then figure out how to bring it home to the local media. So
all news is local, right?
What's that?
All news is local, right?
Yeah,
finding
exactly.
That local angle, that local appeal.
And what you just gave as an example, you had a story and then you were able to match it to the reporter. So another asset that we bring to the table for our clients or our employer is having those relationships and that knowledge. So I think in order to be a good PR person, you need to follow a lot of different media and pay attention to those bylines, or who are the reporters or the producers, or even now, because there's such a shortage of people in a lot of newsrooms, a lot of photojournalists are out in the field. Like it's good to know them too, because sometimes you could pitch a story to the guy who's like the videographer, or the gal who's the videographer. And I just did that this week myself. And I had a story that had to do with like a 140-day swimming streak that one of my clients is on, swimming in a lake in Maine. And I knew that this particular photojournalist would like to go and shoot this guy jumping in the lake at night because he has to keep a streak going.
That's great. What a great visual. Photo desks are some of my favorite people to pitch.
Right.
I love coming up or recognizing that, wow, there's this amazing image here. And sometimes, to your point, maybe there's more of an image than there is a whole story, right? Maybe there's not enough for an entire story to be written. But boy, there's this great image, and there's a little bit of a story, a caption-sized story that goes with it.
Right.
I pitch photo desks all the time. I pitch independent videographers all the time, because there's a couple stations in the New York City market where they have independent videographers who are just out with the camera, and they're going places and telling stories with their camera, with nat sound, with just interviews. There's no reporter, there's no microphone, there's no voice of God, so to speak. There's no narration. It's just the people. Those are terrific stories.
And another one not to forget is the meteorologists. Like sometimes there are stories that will tie in somehow with the weather. And it sometimes can be just sort of a loose connection to the weather. But I used to work in the ski business, and we used to send video down to the Weather Channel all the time. And they would show footage, like especially at this time of year when sometimes there'll be full fall foliage and sometimes it'll snow. So you have that beautiful palette of foliage color and then the white snow trails. So we would, sometimes hit up the Weather Channel. I still have like Jim Cantori as a meteorologist that I've known forever. The Weather Channel.
Absolutely.
So this is one of the things I find like the most exciting about our profession is matching up the stories and building the relationships and, as you say, knowing who to hit up and when.
And I've said this repeatedly, and I sometimes get into interesting conversations about this concept, but I have just as much interest in helping the reporter as I do my client, right?
Good one.
Thinking, how can I help this reporter?
Right.
And not abdicating your obligation to your client, but how can I help this reporter tell a great story? Because that's what they want. They want great stories. They are grateful to good PR people
Yes.
who can point them in the direction of a great story and then provide the interviews, the photo, the video, or the whatever, the opportunity to go cover those great stories.
Right.
There's this horrible, and it gets me a little worked up, so I'm going to try not to get worked up here. There's this horrible perception about PR people that we are somehow disingenuous or not completely honest. And it boils down to that four-letter word, nails on a chalkboard for me, spin. Good PR people don't spin.
No.
Because we don't have to, because we got good stories. And we want to give good stories to reporters to inform their audience of the interesting or funny or comical or essential or critical or life-saving information that we have access to through our clients. So I always say that PR people have just as much interest in helping the reporter as we do our client, and it's not mutually exclusive.
Absolutely. And sometimes when you're pitching a reporter, it pays you to provide like 3 examples. So one of the examples might be your own client, but you might choose 2 other examples to sort of constitute a trend too. So I've done that and had reporters say, wow, that was really awesome that you kind of did that background work for me. So,
and now you've become the critical thing that we all need to be to reporters, is a resource,
a trusted resource.
And the next time they need something, they're ringing you up.
That's right.
That's what creates that terrific working relationship with reporters. And that's what helps you do your job. And it helps get your clients what you've signed up with them to get, which is publicity and exposure and message broadcast for them.
Right. Which leads me to my next question. And once you get the interest from the reporter, how do you prepare a client for a great interview?
Media prep. It is essential. It is essential. And not just, the who, what, where, when, why, but walking them through exactly, or as close as you can predict, how the interview is going to go. Look, right. You and I have been doing this for a long time, right, Nancy?
Yes.
We can guess the questions that are going to get asked,
right?
The landmines that are going to come up,
right?
And we know how to coach a client to make them, and here's the word that I use, confident in the interview,
right.
Not comfortable, because when you get comfortable, you slip up, right?
Right.
And maybe you go too long, or maybe you say something you wish you hadn't said, and once that microphone is on, it's on, right? Whether you're doing a print interview or whatever, mics are hot until they're not.
Right.
Helping a client get confident in having that conversation with the reporter. And again, the reporter rooted for you. The reporter wants the client, to give them good information, because if the client is a dud, the story's a dud, right? So they want them to give them helpful information, and not 99% of reporters aren't doing gotcha, right? There's 1% of the reporters in the world that are doing gotcha, and they're all sitting in the White House briefing room.
Yeah.
Everybody else is just writing the story that they and their editor have agreed on writing. And it's typically a good, and if you're pitching it, it's typically a good story for your client. I go through media prep with them. We can do a coaching session if we want to. More times than not, it's just being a bit of a cheerleader for the client and letting them know that they know all the answers. They just need to have the confidence in themselves to articulate them in the right way. And I always tell them that the reporter doesn't know what you don't say. Meaning, if you need to hold something back, you can hold something back. They won't know that. But if you don't say the thing you want to say, they don't know that either.
Right.
You got to tell them the thing you want to get across, because I've had clients in the way past, pick up the article and go, but he didn't say the thing that I wanted to say. I said, well, did you say it? And he goes, no. I said, well, that's the problem.
Right. Well, one of my favorite episodes of the PR podcast, and I have to apologize because I don't remember the name of your guest, but he's a media trainer. I think he's Canadian, and he was talking about
Warren Weeks.
What was his name?
Warren Weeks.
Warren Weeks. And he told a riveting story about the train crash. That's probably 10 years ago in Lac-Mégantic, Quebec. And I know that because that's actually not far from Sugarloaf, but the ski resort that I used to represent. when the train came down into the town and tragically killed, I think, 74 people. And then the CEO of the train company was interviewed, and he made it all about him. It was like, oh, yes, this was a nightmare. And he kept repeating the word nightmare. As if it was so hard for him in his career. It's like, well, what about the families of the 74 people who died? Yeah. And I'll tell you, I have listened to that episode several times, and I have used that as an example with my clients. So thank you for doing that episode with Warren Weeks.
Well, I'm going to thank Warren because it's a great story. And Warren is a terrific media trainer who's based in Canada and wonderful on Twitter. Just look him up on Twitter, follow him. He's awesome. But you know what, the interesting part about the story that you just relayed, you're absolutely right, what he said on the podcast. But what he also said was that those interviews where he was making it all about himself were on days 2 and 3 and 4 and beyond. And what Warren said was on first day, when he did his first set of interviews, he was right on point. He said all the things you'd expect a sympathetic, empathetic, troubled CEO to say.
Right.
But in his brain, and I forget if Warren said he's extrapolating this or the guy actually said it. He said, well, I said it the first day. I didn't think I needed to say it again.
Oh, gosh.
You know, and that's a critical part of media prep. And it's a critical part of media performance. When you're doing interviews, you've got to say your key messages over and over and over and over again. And it's going to sound boring to you, but it's not to an outlet that's hearing and an audience that's hearing it for the first time. So you got to make sure you're sort of an echo chamber on yourself and making sure that you're saying the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, just about the time that it starts sounding boring to you is just about the time that it starts impacting or having, resonating with the audience.
Absolutely true. 100% cosign.
Well, Jody, I am loving this conversation. We're going to take a short break. We're going to hear from my friend, Mike Duguay at Thomas College, and then we'll be right back with more of our conversation with Jody Fisher.
After reading PR Works, I really started to think about how marketing actually works. And I know that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but what I realized is what each platform nowadays that we use out there in digital media and social media has its own nuance and also quirks to it. And understanding how they're used is exceedingly important. Because when you have a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail. And you can't approach it that way in marketing. And that's where I think Nancy's brilliance really shined in PR Works. I think grow your audience, grow your brand is really sort of the manifesto of understanding that there's many different levels to marketing. It's on your personal side of your brand, how actually you express yourself through business, but also what people hear you saying and what they see out there in the public eye as well. So I think what's really important there, that's really the blueprint of how you go about using these new social media platforms, but also to express who you are as a human being. Because people want to see you authentically and genuinely working with not only what you do, but also with the customers. And Nancy, on a personal level, I think that's who she is. She embodies that approach.
Welcome back to the PR Maven Podcast, and thanks for those kind words to Mike Duguay. And we're here talking with Jody Fisher from the PR Podcast today. And this is also available right now in real time on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So it's very exciting. We can share our conversation with so many people in so many different ways. I love that. So, Jody, some people think news releases are dead. As a matter of fact, actually, recently we were working with a client on a launch of a new destination resort. And this client, like right in the middle of our Marshall Plan process, talked to somebody in digital marketing who said, oh, you should not work with a PR agency. PR is dead. This person thought that PR was just press releases and that they're dead. So we actually lost the client because this client decided to go with a digital marketing agency instead of a PR agency. So how are news releases a terrific exercise to get your language aligned, Jody?
Well, you hit it on the head, Nancy. Number one, news releases are not dead. And don't take my word for it. Take the word of a dozen reporters that I've talked to in the last couple of months. And every time I pitch them a story or something, most of them will say, sure, do you also have a news release on that? Not because they want to print the news release, not they would want to take verbatim what you're saying in the news release, but because it, at least they assume, it's chock full of information. It's full of stuff that they need to start to formulate the story they want to write. And they're not going to write the story that you're telling in the news release, but there's all these bits and pieces in there that they're going to pull out. There are links and there are websites and there are names and there are quotes and it starts to give them a vibe for the kind of story that they're going to write. And so news releases are not dead, period, end of story. And that's from all the reporters that I talk with, at least. But to answer your question directly, Nancy, I use news releases for no other reason than to align, like you said, align the language, right? You have a client that comes to you and say, we're doing this thing. And you start to say, okay, what's this thing? You start to talk about it and they're spitting out all this information and okay, great. And you talk with someone else who's involved in the project and they describe it a little bit differently. And you're like, oh, okay, hold on. We got to put all this stuff together. So I go through the exercise of writing a news release, writing a headline, setting it all up, getting all the information, the who, what, where, when, and all that jazz. I make up a couple of quotes, I do all that stuff. And then I share it around with the client and I get their reaction to it. And they either approve it or they edit it or they go, no, wait, that's not what we were talking about. All of those reactions are great because it starts to get everybody on the same page as to the story that we're going to tell here. And then once you get that released to a final product, you have a workable public document that you can use if you need to use it. Now, maybe you're not going to use it. Maybe you will. You probably will. And the main thing I'm thinking of is the client is probably going to put it on their website in their news section. And if your client doesn't have a news section, by the way, beat them a couple times and then tell them to make a news section on their website.
Or make it for them.
Right, or make it for them. Right. You're exactly right. And then send them an invoice.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But in all seriousness, they're probably going to put it on their website. They're probably going to take language, pull it out of there and do social media posts. They're probably going to take it and put it in their e-newsletter or whatever information their direct marketing to their stakeholder audiences, whatever those are. So even if you don't use the news release with a news reporter, you're still going to use it in a bunch of other ways. So I always write the news release.
I agree. And it also, once it's on the website, then it serves as somewhat of a historical record as well. You can look back.
I love that you just used that phrase because I've described this, especially to new clients, and go ahead, steal this. Public relations is writing your history.
Yeah.
Because when someone wants to know who you are, what do? They go and they Google, right?
Right.
What do they come up with? Your news coverage.
Right.
So what do you want people to know about you 5 years from now? PR is writing your history. It is.
Right.
It is.
Yeah. And actually, we have a bank client for whom we wrote a 150th anniversary book not too long ago. And we were referring back to the news releases through the year. So it is sort of the archive.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how can news releases be turned into other vehicles?
Yeah. So like I said, you've got that agreed upon language. When you reach the end of that process, you've got the language that you're going to use to talk about this thing that you're talking about. Turn it into a blog post, right? Just change it. You're right. If you're a PR person, you're a writer, right?
Yeah.
Take that thing, turn it into a blog post. Now you got a blog that the CEO can publish on their LinkedIn page, that you can put somewhere else on your website, that you can take and then use as a script to shoot a little video that can also go on your website and your social and your whatever other places that where you embed your video. Utilize YouTube. Oh my gosh, utilize YouTube, right? It's SEO central, right? It's Google, for crying out loud.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Get yourself a YouTube, if nothing else, get the client a YouTube channel, start post videos, do the appropriate hashtagging and all the proper copy editing and everything to start creating a video archive, because that also will help to juice their SEO. It creates a historical record, like you said, and it just creates more vibrant content. Again, maybe not even for today, but over the long term, if you're creating a video a quarter, At the end of a year, you've got 4 videos online. And if they're, more than a TikTok video, they're going to serve as an archive for the client. You take that news release and turn it into all different forms. Turn it into an opinion piece and pitch it to an industry publication. I do that all the time. All kinds of things. But it starts with that news release, because inside the news release is all that approved language.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And also you could take tweets out of it. You could tweet some of it and then link back to where the whole release is posted. So you and I are big on Twitter.
Oh, love Twitter.
Yeah, me too.
I just hope it doesn't change with, the pending purchase. Or who knows what's going on, but
I know. We have no control over that, unfortunately. How about video, Jody? How about shooting video? What are your recommendations?
Oh, okay. PR people, we all have a TV studio in our pocket. It's our phone, right? And the phone is so powerful. You can shoot, you can do interviews, you can edit if you want. I edit on my computer just because it's easier. You can post all that video. You can send that video to local TV desks. And I do that all the time. Whenever I have a client event, I always go out with my tripod and my camera, and I bought a little $20 lavalier microphone off of Amazon, right? And you just clip that right there, do a video interview, right? Get some B-roll and a SOT, sound on tape, a couple of SOTs, package those all together with your news release, and send it to the local TV desks. You got to become more comfortable with shooting video, and horizontal video, by the way, because TV is horizontal, right? But lots of other formats are as well. So you can shoot vertical for your social, but then make sure you shoot horizontal too for broadcast consumption, and even for YouTube, because YouTube is a horizontal view as well. You got to get comfortable shooting video. We're in a video world. Case closed.
Yes, we are. Absolutely. And yeah, we were talking earlier about visuals, with my friend jumping in the lake. But that was something that we always thought about, again, in the ski business, because skiing is so visual. So whenever we talked about, sending footage to TV stations, it's like, yeah, we got to capture that video.
And I don't know about Maine, but even here in the New York City market, where 5 years ago, you wouldn't see a piece of tape aired on TV if it wasn't shot by a union cameraman.
Totally.
And I am totally on the side of the union cameraman.
Right.
But there are not enough cameras to go around.
Right.
There are not enough bodies to cover all the news that is out there. And in the last 2 years, especially during COVID, I mean, even Zoom, right? Even videos over Zoom, all that flipped, because access to information, and specifically video interviews, was so limited that TV newsrooms had a fundamental philosophical shift, and they started taking video from other sources, and they haven't gone back.
Right.
I have had every station in the New York City market run a video that I have shot on my iPhone. And that's amazing. Not because I'm so great. I'm just saying, properly lit, properly mic'd, properly shot, they need that video. They need that to make their newscasts work. That's why I say get comfortable with video, because it's going to help you and help your client and grow your business.
Yeah. Well, you're the consummate or quintessential PR person, because you know how to use the technology and all the different tools and channels, and I admire you for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. That's high praise coming from you, Nancy. Thank you.
Well, I know you love Maine too, so I'm just looking forward to having you move to Maine someday.
We'll get there. We go every summer. We stay on the beach every summer. Absolutely love it. This past year was just terrific. We're all surfing out at the beach, and we just love it. We're going to go further north next time. I think we're going to get a little further up. We've gone day trips up to Portland and places like that, but we want to get up to Acadia.
Yeah.
And then maybe even a little inland. We'll see.
All right. Well, you can talk to me anytime, because I know all the spots.
I absolutely will.
So, Jody, is there a book, a podcast, or an app, other than, of course, the PR podcast, that you'd like to recommend to my listeners, and why?
Well, definitely your podcast.
Thank you.
Because it's fabulous. And it's funny. I was a fan of your podcast before we even connected. So,
Wow.
Connecting with you is a little dream of mine as well. So thank you for having me on again. There's another one of our colleagues who I think who's also a Mainer, Molly McPherson.
Yes.
She's terrific. And she specializes in crisis communications.
Right.
And that's a special brand, right? I do a little bit of crisis, when things go wrong, but I don't live it and breathe it the way Molly does.
Right.
And she is a terrific crisis communicator, helping brands, especially respond to digital crises where, you talk about news cycles. It used to be that news cycles were 12 hours, then they went to 24 hours. Now, literally, a news cycle is about an hour.
Right. Yeah.
And she is terrific. She's all over social media. She got a great TikTok, but she's also got a terrific podcast called the Indestructible PR Podcast. So check that out.
Okay. I have not, I know Molly, and I've had her on my podcast, but I've never listened to her podcast. So I'll have to do that. Thanks. So how can people get in touch with you?
Very easy. You can either look us up online. My personal website is jodyfisherpr.com. My professional work affiliation is with Austin Williams, as you mentioned. So we're at austinwilliams.com. You can find all of our work. We're a full service marketing, advertising, digital, and PR agency. You can find me all over the socials. I'm at Jody Fisher. I think you're going to display that on the bottom of the screen as well. And you can send me an email either to jodyfisher@live.com or at my work email, which is jodyf@austinwilliams.com. So awesome. Tons of ways you can find me.
Awesome. Well, Jody, this has been so enjoyable. Thank you for spending the afternoon talking with me. And I know we could go on and on, so we'll just have to have you back another time.
That sounds like a plan, Nancy. Thank you so much. This was a treat.
Okay. Thank you. And have a great day, Jody. And have a great day to everybody in PR Maven Nation. Thanks for listening to this episode of the PR Maven Podcast. I invite you to share a review of the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. You can also join the PR Maven Nation on Facebook. It's free to join, and it's a great community of like-minded individuals who are all looking to learn and grow from one another. If you use an Alexa device, use your Alexa app to search the skills and games section to find and enable the PR Maven Podcast Flash Briefing. This will give you access to exclusive content and more PR and marketing advice. Thanks again for listening, and have a great rest of your week, PR Maven Nation.